Hi, everybody. I'm Cath, and I'm working with SILT as a consultant at the moment. And today we are going to be looking at integrating Turnitin within the Brightspace environment. And I do have my colleague here with me as well, Cheng-Wen. So I'm just going to hand over to Cheng-Wen to say hi to everybody.
Hi, everyone. I'm Cheng-Wen, and I'm working in the academic staff development team at SILT. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Cheng-Wen. Thank you. Right. So as with some of our previous webinars, and I see a lot of people here, a lot of familiar faces and familiar names, just a disclaimer up front that these slides may be changed and updated because we are working in the Brightspace environment that is new and somewhat in flux. So if anything changes in the Brightspace environment in terms of procedure or layout or look or interface, we will update these slides accordingly. So don't get alarmed if you come back to these slides and see something has changed. We're just trying to keep the two in sync between these resources and what you would find in the environment. Today's webinar, we are going to be looking at adding Turnitin to an assignment and viewing the Turnitin report. We will then also take a look at adding a Turnitin PeerMark assignment, and then looking at PeerMark from a teacher perspective, how to actually set it up, and then looking at it also from a student's perspective. So that would be a student actually engaging in the assignment and submitting, a student actually adding some feedback, and then a student receiving some feedback, and the teacher having the kind of overview of that review and feedback that has been passed between the various students. So what does the Turnitin tool allow you to do? Well, effectively, I'm sure most of you would be familiar with Turnitin for the originality checks. So as you know, this is something that is applied to assignments, assignments being the tool where the longer submissions are actually submitted, and it effectively checks for plagiarism. So they call it the originality check, but effectively means that it's checking for plagiarism. So within that tool, there is that facet that checks for plagiarism, and there's also another facet called the grade mark, where it lets you add comments and inline text and highlight sections and add feedback for grading purposes. And then the additional tool that we're also going to have a look at, it is also a Turnitin product, is the one called PeerMark. And this is where students can review other students' assignment submissions, and they can provide feedback and comments on those submissions. So just to note, with the use of Turnitin, if you've been in some of the previous webinars, you will know about special access. So special access is something that exists within the Brightspace environment when you need to allow a student special access to an assignment, in this case, that is outside the designated start or end dates. So if you are going to be using Turnitin combined with special access, it's just good to note that the two have a little bit of a conflict there. So you need to kind of just be aware of those two elements which are not quite in sync, because Turnitin is a third-party tool that works within the Brightspace environment. So it's not an actual element of Brightspace. It's just an integration between Turnitin and Brightspace. Right, so we had a bit of a chat to some of the people that popped in early, and we found out that some of the people here today don't have access to their sandbox yet, but they're being really proactive and familiarizing themselves with the environment. But I know that some of the other people that we've chatted to do have access to a sandbox, but just to let you know, this is where you would actually find it. So that is the web address of where Brightspace is currently residing. It's at uct.brightspace.com. And when you arrive on this page, the familiar blue button is what you would use to log in, and then you would just use your regular UCT credentials. So once you had hopped inside the Brightspace environment, you'll be greeted with this UCT homepage, and this is where you would also find all of your courses listed. So these are courses that are assigned to you, so you might see different courses to somebody else. You can either find them on the cards on the homepage here, or you can use what they call the waffle icon, more formally known as the course selector at the top there. That will give you a comprehensive listing of all the courses that are aligned to your profile. Now, because we're looking at Turnitin as a tool, this is something which integrates with course content. So we do need to go into a course to see how this is going to function. So we mentioned that we are going to be looking at Turnitin and adding it to an assignment. So remember that the main feature of Turnitin is the plagiarism checker. So it's basically added to an assignment. So we are going to go into a course in Brightspace and look at the assignment tool. So once you are in a course, you can find your assignment tool by clicking on activities on the navigation menu and then going down to the assignment item on the drop-down menu. But as with Brightspace, and there's always many ways to actually get to a certain point. So you can also find it if you go via Manage Course and then you go to Course Admin, because Course Admin will give you the comprehensive listing of all of the tools that are assigned to this particular course. So if you are on the course homepage, the quickest way is to go through activities. So here we are on the assignment page. So this is the page that would load when you go to the assignment tool. So you can add Turnitin to an existing assignment, or you might want to create an assignment from scratch. So if it's an existing assignment, you would find it listed there, and you would click the downward pointing arrow, and from the drop-down list, you would click on Edit Assignment. So this would be an existing assignment, and you'd just be tacking on Turnitin to this assignment. Or if you wanted to start from scratch and you wanted to create a new assignment, you would be using the blue button at the top that says New Assignment. So on the next slide, you'll be able to see when you're on that initial page, when you've actually gone into the settings of an assignment. We had a webinar on this, I think last week. You will find that familiar panel on the right-hand side is where most of your settings are for this particular assignment. And the one that you want to focus on is the third item down on the right-hand panel that is called Evaluation and Feedback. So you'll notice that initially it loads in a contracted view, so you can't see all of the settings. So you need to click on the little arrow to actually expand that element to see all of the settings under Evaluation and Feedback. And once you expand that, you will see that the bottom item there, it says Turnitin integration. And this is where we're going to focus on adding Turnitin to this particular assignment. So to access that, you would click on the blue wording that says Manage Turnitin. Once you've clicked on Manage Turnitin, you'll get this pop-up window. You'll be presented with this pop-up window, which gives you quite a few settings pertaining to the Turnitin integration. So at the top, I've just outlined in orange there that when they are enabling the originality check, it does take a little while. You'll see a little turning circle there, so don't get alarmed if you see that. So it says, please wait while we contact Turnitin, because it's effectively linking this assignment and connecting to the third-party tool, which is Turnitin. So here you can see various options you can apply. So the first one is to actually enable the originality check for this. So remember that the originality check is effectively the plagiarism checker. Then you can decide whether you would like to allow learners to see the Turnitin similarity scores in their submissions. So if you would like them to be able to see that feedback, that report and the scores, you would check that checkbox. And then under frequency, so this would align to how you'd actually set up your assignment. You know that for some assignments, you may want one submission. Sometimes you might want an assignment where you allow them to submit unlimited times until a due date. So depending on your settings for your particular assignment, you have two options here, either to have an automatic originality checking on all of the submissions, or you can identify an individual submission for the originality checking. So you would check the appropriate setting there for frequency. And then a little lower down, you'll find a button that says more options in Turnitin. So these initial options they present you here, these are the base level options that you need to select to actually enable and connect the originality check. But the more options give you a deeper level of settings that you can apply. So let's take a look at those more options and see what else you can apply to this. So if this is the first time that you will be connecting Turnitin, you might be presented with this end user license agreement. You have to click on agree, I agree, in order to get beyond this little pop-up window to actually see the more options. So once you click on I agree, these are some of the additional optional settings that you can actually apply. So the first one is the submission settings. So where are the papers? The papers are effectively the submissions that the students are going to be sending through. Where would you like them to reside? Would you like them to go into the standard paper repository and all be collected there? Or you can choose to not store the submitted papers. So if they are stored in the paper repository, that means they become another element that the check will be checked against. So depending on what it is that you have the settings for your particular assignment, you can decide to store them or not store them. And then on the next slide, you'll be able to see the next setting is you can also, these are, remember, completely optional settings, enable a grammar checking, and you can also attach a rubric. So as the name implies, the grammar checking will check things like spelling, grammar, usage, mechanics, and style. And this rubric here, where it says attach a rubric, is a rubric that actually resides within Turnitin. It is not the same as the rubric that you normally apply within the Brightspace environment. So this is an additional rubric completely contained within the Turnitin environment. On the next slide, you'll be able to see the next optional settings, which is what would you like to compare the submission against? Is it going to be compared against the student paper repository? So remember, this setting then ties up with your selection that you made initially. Would you like to compare it against current and archived website content? And would you like to also check it against periodicals, journals, and publications? And then for the similarity report, you can decide to exclude certain things. So you may want to exclude bibliographic materials or quoted materials or even small sources. So these are all optional things that you can decide to include or exclude on the similarity report. And then on the next slide, you'll be able to see the additional optional settings relating to an assignment template. So this would be if you had a large chunk of text that you didn't want to be included, and it's something that you could actually specify that could be potentially included in every student submission, but because it would then be included in the submission, it would be compared against itself. You could specify that text to be excluded, and you could create this here by either uploading it or creating your own one to identify the chunk of text that needed to be excluded. And if these are settings that you would like to use again in future, you could always check the checkbox at the bottom there that says save these settings for future use. Then all of these settings that you had created could be applied to subsequent assignments that you set up without having to go through all of these steps again. So once you had finished this, you would just click on the submit button. Once you are back on your assignments dashboard, you will see that your particular assignment now has a little icon next to it. And that icon indicates to you that this particular assignment is now Turnitin enabled, which means that Turnitin is enabled on this particular assignment and will be in effect for the student submissions according to the settings that you have selected. Right, we're now going to have a look at the Turnitin report. So once students have engaged in this assignment and they have uploaded their submissions, the reports will be generated on their submissions. What is it that you can see and how do you as a lecturer access these reports? So from your assignment dashboard, you need to navigate to the point where you can actually see the submissions. So there's two ways to do this. Either you can click on the downward pointing arrow next to the assignment and select the first option that says View Submissions. Or if you have new submissions which have arrived, there is a column on this table here that you can see says New Submissions, and you can see there's a number there. You would just click on that number, and that would take you right through to the page where you can see all the submissions that have been received for this particular assignment. So once you are on the submission page and you are looking at the submissions here by users, you would have your usernames listed. The attachments that they had uploaded would be listed below that. So you can see here's called a sample assignment docx. That is the submission there. And right next to that, very easy, you can see the Turnitin Similarity report, and you'll see the percentage there. And to actually access and view that report, it's as easy as just clicking on that number. So you would click on that number, and on the next slide, you'd be able to see what the report looks like. So this is probably like very similar to what you've seen before, and you're pretty familiar with this. So you have your navigation on the left-hand side. If it's a multiple page document, you have your highlighting applied, and you have your various items there that you can actually check through. So you have your flags, you have your matching score. So at the moment, we're looking at the match overview, where it's got 89%, and each of those items you'd be able to click on, and it would actually show you where it is in the text. And you have various other options as well. You can view the sources where these matches have been located. You can apply various filters and settings, and you can also decide to exclude various sources, and you can also have a look at the document detail. And the last two options there, which look grayed out, but they are actually active, those are probably ones that you want to focus on as well, because that is where you can download this particular report. And the bottom one is where you can actually see the submission information. So this is what the report would look like, and these are all the functionalities that you would have accessible to you to actually see all the feedback on this report. I'm just going to pause at this point quickly and find out if there's any questions. You're welcome to unmute or raise your hand and unmute to ask a question, or if you have any questions, you're welcome to put those into the text chat as well. So I'm just checking in if there are any questions up until this point regarding adding Turnitin into an assignment and then reviewing the similarity report. Right, not seeing any questions at this stage. So we're going to move on now and take a look at the other feature related to Turnitin, and that is called PeerMark. So as the name implies, it is when students are able to actually review other students' submissions. And again, we're going to look at this in the context of an assignment. So because this involves a number of people, so the teacher or the lecturer will initially set it up, and then it requires students to engage in this, both to submit and also to review each other's work, and then to actually review the feedback. We're going to look at this from three people's perspective, from a teacher's perspective, and then a student submitting, and then a student actually viewing. So first of all, we need to create the assignment as a lecturer or as a teacher. So one of the ways you can do this is you can within the content area. So now this is within the content area of your course. You could go to add existing. And when you clicked on add existing, you would get a window popping up which asks, what would you like to add? You could click on the more, the three dots which say more, and you get a window popping up, and the last item in that window says Turnitin PeerMark. So that is where you would find your PeerMark tool to be added. On the next slide, you'll be able to see how we're going to go about setting this up. So there are quite a few settings. They're not all mandatory. Some of them are completely optional. But it's good to know where these settings are. So first of all, at a base level, you do have to give your PeerMark assignment a title. So that's right at the top, you give it a title and then some instructions. So these are instructions that the students would see as to how to go about completing this assignment. You could then put in the max grade. So that would be what you're going to be grading this assignment out of. And then very familiar, these 3 dates, which you have. You've got your start date, you've got a due date, and you've got a feedback release date. So effectively, as you might think, that the start date is actually when it becomes available for the students to actually access. The due date is by when they need to have submitted. And the feedback, that is once the students have actually reviewed each other's work, that governs when that feedback is visible to the other students. You then need to enable that check mark where it says enable PeerMark. That's very important. And then, as we had on the Turnitin, there are a number of additional optional settings as well. And I've put those on the right-hand side. Normally these open in their own little window. But some of the optional settings, and you'll see that these are very similar to the ones that you applied on the Turnitin similarity check as well. So you can decide where this, the submissions are going to be. Are they going to be stored or are they not going to be stored? You can allow file submissions of any file type. You can decide if you're going to allow late submissions. You can enable the translated matching, grammar checking, and the rubric as you could on the Turnitin similarity checker as well. And you can decide what you would like to compare this against, whether it's the paper repository or the archived website content or periodicals, journals, and publications. And then on the next slide, you will see a number of additional settings as well. So these are exactly the same as what you applied on the similarity checker. There's one important one there that I want to draw your attention to when it comes to the similarity reports and the student submissions, when to actually generate these. So you can choose to generate them immediately. That means, however, that a student cannot resubmit. So they make a submission, the report is created and it's generated immediately. So just be careful on the settings that you're choosing, that you make sure that it's in alignment with the settings for the actual assignment. You can also decide to generate reports immediately and the students can resubmit until the due date, or you can generate reports on the due date. So that means students can resubmit until the due date, but they'll only get the report on the last due date. And then some of the other settings are to exclude the assignment template. So that's exactly the same as you had before. If you have a large body of text that you know is going to be consistently in each student submission, you don't want that to be flagged as similar. You can specify this here and it will be omitted from the similarity check. Again, you can also save these settings for future use. If this is a setup that you're going to use really often, it will save you quite a bit of time, and then you can just click submit. So once you have done that, you would think to yourself, well, I've done a lot of settings. I should be able to see something now here as far as the peer review is concerned, but you'll actually see that it looks pretty blank and it says there's nothing here yet. Submissions will appear here once students have started to submit the assignment. So it looks a little bit empty in spite of all of that initial setup. So what we're going to do is actually on the drop-down list under PeerMark, you can see that's the fourth tab along, you'll see PeerMark, and we are going to go into the PeerMark setup section. So here you will see in the setup section, there are quite a few additional settings that you actually need to put in place. So there are 3 tabs here. You can see the first one says PeerMark assignment. The next tab says PeerMark questions. And the next tab says distribution. So we're going to look at what you would find under each of these tabs. So the first tab under PeerMark assignment, this is where you have the assignment title, the instructions, and the points. And on the right-hand side, you'll see that the dates are termed slightly differently. It says students can review from. So this is when you would allow the students to actually actively review other students' content. From what date would you allow that to take place? And then the students can review until. So how long do they have to actually complete their review of other students' work? And then when would you like the peer feedback available from? So once students have done that, when would you like that feedback to become available for other students? And then at the bottom, you'll see there are some additional settings, and those are listed on the right-hand side just for viewing purposes now. So some of the additional settings you can apply here is, would you like to award the maximum point on review sort of automatically? And probably no is the setting that you would like to apply there. And the next setting says students can view the names of their peers during review. So if you would like to have anonymous peer review, this is where you would set that to say, no, I don't want students to see other students' names. Then the next one says students without a submission can review. So if you would like to enforce that students need to submit first before they're actually allowed to review others, this is where you would set that setting. And then the next one says automatically distribute papers for review. So depending on the number of people you would have in your class, this is where you could set and decide how many papers you would like each student to have to review. So it could be one paper and then they've done their due, or you could want them to review 2, 3, or 4 papers. So depending on how many students you had in your class, that would determine the number there. And then you can also decide students can self-select papers for review. So that means either students are going to pick from a list, depending on how many you've said that they need to review, or you can let the system automatically assign a paper to review to a student, in which case the student doesn't get a choice. And then you can also decide if you would like the student to review their own paper. So these are some very useful settings, which you can find under the additional settings section on the first tab, which says PeerMark assignment. Then we're going to move on to the next tab where it says PeerMark questions. So here, as the instruction says, you need to click on Add Question button to begin adding questions to the PeerMark assignment. So what are these questions? Because you've already set up an assignment and you've told the students what you want them to submit and what the assignment is about. So these questions are actually guiding questions for the student who is doing the review. You can set up a number of questions for them to actually engage with while they're doing the review. So you could add questions like, question number 1, has the style guide been followed? And then the student would check the review and review through the submission and then answer that question. So let's see how we're going to add questions. So here we go. We're going to click on questions and you get a little pop-up. And in the first field there, you would enter your question. So here's a question saying, have the style rules been followed? That's the question that you're asking the reviewer, the student reviewer. And there's 2 different question types you can get. You can either get a free response, which is effectively like a written response, or you can get a scale response. So this is an open-ended question. So the type to select here would be a free response. And then you can also specify the minimum answer length. So if you are obviously going after a meaningful response and meaningful feedback, you can set how long that answer should be. So here we've set it that it's going to be 100, so that's words. So otherwise, if you set this at something really low, your feedback could be just yes. And yes is not very, very meaningful or helpful. So it's good to actually set a higher number here so you get a longer answer. So once you've done that, you just click on save. And we're just going to take a look at adding a question of the other type as well, the scale question. So here you could ask something like, how would you rate the content that's been covered? And you could ask them a scale question, and the scale could be up to 5. So it would be like a rating scale from 1 to 5. And you could itemize what the lowest item would be. So it could be something like inadequate, all the way up to the highest element, which could be excellent. So once you had specified that, you would just click on save. So back here on the PeerMark question section, you can now see that these 2 questions have been added. So there you can see your question, you can see the question type, and you can see the settings that you've applied to it. So our free response, we've asked them to have a minimum answer length of 100, and our scale question, we have specified our highest and our lowest items. So on the right-hand side, you can see you could always go back in and edit these using the little pencil icon, or if you wanted to get rid of it completely, you could also delete it. So the way I have shown you to add questions here is basically the quickest and easiest way to do it by just going to adding questions. But you will notice that there's a set of buttons here, which is relating to a library. So a library would be a selection of questions that you commonly came back to. So if you would like to create a question that you know you're always going to add onto every peer-reviewed assignment, you could create the question in the question library. That means that the next time you're creating an assignment and you're wanting to be adding those same questions, you would just have to select it from the library, and you wouldn't have to manually go and set up that question each time. So I've shown you the quick way to kind of do it on the fly, but long term, it would probably be beneficial for you to actually use the library element and eventually build up your library of kind of standard questions that you would use each time in a peer-reviewed assignment. Right, so we're going to move on to the third tab along now, which relates to distribution. All right, so this would relate to the settings that you had chosen earlier. Remember, if you would like to force the system to select who the assignments go to, or if you'd like the student to be able to pick which assignment they actually review. So distribution relates to that. And in this example, you can see that we have got a forced assignment. So we only have 2 students here. So it was a pretty small and controlled class. So basically each student is going to be reviewing each other's work, and you can see that this is system aligned. So the system is going to pick the other student accordingly to review. Right, so when we are back on our assignment inbox, you can see on the gray line there, we've got assignment inbox, analytics, and PeerMark. So the assignment inbox is the default view that you would see each time you arrived on this PeerMark page. You can see here that eventually you would start to see the student submissions. So here you can see that 2 students have submitted. You can see the title of the document that they were uploaded for their submission. You can see when they uploaded it and the viewed and grade, and you can see the similarity report there as well. And just to note that the 3 dots do give you quite a few other additional options as well. You can upload or download, and you can remove from the inbox or request permanent deletion. So the request permanent deletion would be if you had decided, remember on your settings, you had an option to store the submission in the repository. If you had selected that option and you had a submission that you wanted to get rid of, this is where you would request to remove it from the repository. On the analytics tab, moving along, this is just a very high-level view at the moment because there were only 2 students for these analytics, but it does give you quite a nice overview, and there's actually more than what is revealed on this particular screenshot. It does give you quite a nice visual feedback on the submissions and other elements which you can't see completely on the screenshot here, but the analytics are really useful. And you can see at the top right there, you can also export the data. So you can export all of these analytics and reuse it in other contexts as well. Right, so that is the teacher setting up the PeerMark initially. So what is it that the student will see? So when a student is actually taking the assignment, what will they see on a PeerMark assignment? So let's jump in and take a look. So when they're going through the content, they would come across a part which would pertain to the PeerMark assignment. And if it was the first time they were engaging with a PeerMark assignment, as with the teacher engaging with PeerMark or Turnitin for the first time, they would be asked to agree to the end user license agreement. So they do need to click on agree before they can actually proceed. Once they've clicked on agree, they would see their dashboard here. So you can see that it says at the top in the gray bar, assignment dashboard, and the next one says PeerMark reviews. So the first one we're going to look at on the assignment dashboard is you can see there is the assignment that has been created for them. And there's a very obvious button as well that they're going to use when they're going to upload their submission. So you can see that this is currently in the contracted view. You can see the title, sample assignment, but you can't actually see the detail. So once you click on that assignment where it says sample assignment, you'll be able to see the detail. So this just gives you a brief overview of what is required for the assignment. So you would see the title here. This is where you would see any of the instructions that you'd actually set up. They would also be able to see the start, the due, and the feedback release date, the maximum points, and they'll also be able to see some of the additional settings that you had put for this particular assignment. So in this instance, we are asking students to create their assignment and upload their file. So once they'd actually completed that, they would use the upload submissions button to upload their file. So let's see what happens once we click on upload. The student would be presented with this pop-up window. And as you might expect, this is exactly where they're going to submit their file. And you'll see along the top, there is a kind of a progress bar. So at the moment, we're in the upload stage. So it's going to ask them to actually look for their file. So they are going to click on a browse button. They'll find their file and they'll be able to select it. See, it says choose file there. Under submission file, they would click on choose file. Once they clicked on that, they would select their file from their computer or wherever it is stored on their computer. And then they would just upload and review. So there you can see it's attached. You can see the submission title and they are ready to upload. So they would click on upload and review. Once they clicked on upload and review, you can see the little progress bars moved along to the next stage where it says review. So this gives them an opportunity to make sure that this is the right file that they're actually submitting. Maybe some students have various versions. To make sure that this is the right one that they're submitting, they can scroll up and down and quickly check that this is correct. And if everything is correct and they're happy to proceed, they click on submit to turn it in. So once they click on submit to turn it in, you'll see that our little progress bar has now gone to the complete stage and they get the confirmation tick saying submission complete. So that all looks good and in order. So once you go out of this view on the next slide, you'll be able to see back on the dashboard. Remember, we're looking at this as a student. So back on the dashboard, you will now see that it has confirmation there that a paper has been uploaded. It's got the upload date and time. And it also gives them the similarity report. And at the end, there's 3 icons there. So the first icon is an option to resubmit the paper. So if you have allowed your students to have multiple submissions, this is where they would resubmit. They can also download their paper again on the next icon along. And the third icon on the right is to download a digital receipt, which looks like the screenshot on the screen here, where it says Turnitin digital receipt. And it's basically acknowledging that their paper was submitted and it has date and time stamps. So that's confirmation for the student that their submission has successfully gone through. So the next step we're going to have a look at is the review process. So this is a student now conducting a peer review of another student's submission. So they've submitted their own work and now they're going to move on to the next step of reviewing one of their peers' submissions. Let's see what that looks like from a student perspective. So on their familiar dashboard, you will see a second item on the gray bar at the top is peer reviews. So when there is something available for them to review, you'll see that this little red dot appears and it actually flashes, indicating that there's something there which has been submitted. And remember, in this instance, it was randomly assigned by the computer, by the system. There is an assignment there that they are going to review. So the way they do that is they access and they click on PeerMark reviews, and at the bottom you will see that there under the review column it says start peer review. Also to notice in the left there under author and uploaded, there is no information there. So that means that they will not be able to identify whose submission they are reviewing, and even the upload date and time is not mentioned there. So there's no ways they'll be able to backtrack and find out whose submission they're actually reviewing. So to get going with the review, they would just click on Start Peer Review in the review column. So once they had clicked on that, you would see that the PeerMark interface would load, and this is a snapshot of what it looks like. So initially the assignment would actually load in the body of the interface there. You can see the text, and a panel would load on the right-hand side. So on the right-hand side, you can see it says questions. So these are the questions that the teacher drew up initially. Remember, we had two questions. One of them we asked, has the style rule been followed? And then we had a scale question asking them how they would rate the content. And remember, we had a scale from 1 to 5, and we had inadequate to excellent. So you can see this is where those questions pop up, and these would be questions guiding the student for review. So they would be able to fill in the content for the free response, the first question, and they'd be able to select the radio button for the scale question. In addition, they can also annotate on the submission as well. They can add comments. So it's very easy. You basically swipe over the text where you would like to add a comment, a little comment box will pop up, and you just add in your comment and click save. So those comments are also available if you have multiple comments throughout the document, would also be saved on the right-hand side. You can see there is a second tab on the right-hand side. Next to questions, there's comments. So if you clicked on comments, you'll be able to see all of the comments that have been saved for this particular document. There's a save button just above that. So as you're working through the review, students can save periodically. And once they'd actually gone through everything and they were happy that they'd made all their comments and completed all the required questions, you can also see at the top in the middle, there is a progress bar indicating it says 100% completed. That 100% completed is actually checking that you've answered all of the questions. So once you'd answered all of your questions and you'd finished all of your comments, you could click on submit. So the student would click submit to actually finish off their review. And then you would get the confirmation message saying that the submission was complete and the link to return to the assignment inbox. So once you clicked on that, you'd come back to this familiar interface again, and you will actually see under PeerMark reviews, and now you can see it says that the author's names are hidden, and you can see that it is actually reviewed. So that is a student conducting a review on another student's submitted work. So the next thing we're going to take a look at is how does a student actually receive this feedback? So this is a student view receiving peer review feedback from another student. What does that look like? So let's have a look at that. And on the assignment dashboard, under the PeerMark review, they would also get a little indicator light to say that some feedback has been received. So if the little light is flashing, that means there's something there that they need to engage with. So they are going to be looking for feedback that they've received. So on this page, you'll see a blue button on the top right where it says received feedback. So they would click on that to access their received feedback. And I put this here because depending on the line speed of the student actually doing the reviewing or trying to access their feedback, they may see a little waiting sign that says, please wait, please be patient, we are busy loading your documents. So if they see this for a little while, they shouldn't be anxious and they shouldn't panic. So once it is loaded, on the next slide, you'll see that they can see the feedback that their student peer has left for them. So all of the comments, the highlighting will be visible and the comments will pop up in, it looks like a little speech bubble. They will also be accessible on the right-hand side as they were on the initial marking interface on the tab called comments. They'll be able to see all of their comments there, and they'll actually be able to see the answer that was supplied to the questions that the student reviewer left for them to see. So here is the answer to the questions, and they're able to access the comments as well. So you can see it's a very simple interface, easy to navigate, and everything that is captured by the reviewer is accessible to the person viewing that feedback as well. So that is a student looking at their feedback. Now we're going to hop back to the teacher view. So what does the teacher see of this student peer review feedback process? What is it that they can see from the students who have left reviews and the students who have viewed the reviews? Let's have a look at the teacher view. So back on the interface here for the peer review, under PeerMark, you will see there's an option there that says PeerMark reviews. And this is where you'll see all the information pertaining to the reviews that have taken place. So here you can see we have 2 students. One of them has submitted. One of them is in the received state that they have received feedback. So that is the one that we're going to take a look at the moment. In the received column, you can see there's a number 1 next to a particular student, and it says view received reviews. So you would click on that, and you'd be able to see the same view that the student had received from the student who had made the comments. So you'll be able to see all of the highlights, you'll be able to see all of the comments, you'll be able to see all of the questions and the feedback to those questions. And it's effectively the same view that the student receives. So if you go back to your familiar dashboard again, which is your assignment inbox, you will see a column there that says grade, because remember that the students are reviewing each other's content. They're not grading each other's content. So you can still add a grade based on the reviews that the students have given, or you can even review it yourself in addition. So if you would like to add a grade to this particular assignment, this is where you would do it. In the assignment inbox, you'd have your students listed, and under the grade column, you would have a little pencil and you would click on that. Once you clicked on that little pencil, on the next slide, you'll be able to see that an interface will pop up. Now this may look slightly similar to the one that you saw right at the start with a similarity checker. And remember, that is because it is a Turnitin product, but the difference is that you're working with the upper part, the grading tools. And here you would be able to also enter a grade right at the top for this particular submission. So you can swap between the different tools. So the grading tools are highlighted at the moment, but you could also go down to the similarity check as well, which is the bottom set of tools there. And once you close this, then you'll be back on your regular interface again. Right, so that was a very fast whirlwind tour through what Turnitin offers in terms of the similarity check and the peer review tool. So I think I'm going to sign off at this point, and thank you very much for joining us.